The winter of 1489 fell upon Krakow like a curse whispered through frozen lips. In the outlying forests of Biały Las, where pine trees grew so dense that daylight barely touched the ground, stood a castle that locals dared not name aloud. They called it simply the Old Stone or the Widow's Keep, though everyone knew who dwelled within its walls. Queen Elżbieta Wysocka, last sovereign of the ancient vampire clan of Biały Las, had ruled these lands for longer than any living soul could remember. Her hair, once golden as summer wheat, had turned white as fresh snow over the centuries, not from age, for her kind did not age as mortals did, but from the weight of immortality itself. It cascaded down her back like a frozen waterfall, stark against the crimson velvet of her gowns. Her eyes held the pale gray of winter storms, eyes that had seen kingdoms rise and fall, eyes that had watched the one man she loved turn to dust 5 years prior. The castle itself was a testament to old Polish nobility built of gray limestone quarried from the Carpathian foothills. Its towers reached toward the heavens as if seeking redemption. Gargoyles with grotesque faces lined the battlements, their mouths open in eternal screams. Inside, the corridor smelled of aged wood, melted wax, and something else, something metallic and ancient that made mortal servants cross themselves before entering. According to the old folklore passed down through generations of frightened villagers, vampires of the Biały Las clan were different from the savage creatures of legend. They were nobles, aristocrats of the night, who had made pacts with dark forces in exchange for eternal life. They could walk in shadows, command lesser creatures of darkness, and their blood hunger was both a curse and a source of terrible power. Silver and garlic kept them at bay. Running water could trap them, and sunlight, though it would not turn them to ash, as tales claimed, weakened them considerably, burning their pale skin like hot iron. Elżbieta had survived for so long because she understood the rules. Never kill wantingly, keep human servants well paid and protected, and maintain the ancient treaties between her kind and the mortal nobility. But since King Kazimír's death, her beloved husband, who had somehow bridged the gap between vampire and human, she had withdrawn from the world. The castle fell into quiet decay, maintained only by a skeleton crew of servants brave enough or desperate enough to work for the undead. On this particular morning, as frost painted intricate patterns on the castle windows, a new figure approached the iron gates. Mikolaj Kowalski trudged through ankle-deep snow, his worn boots leaving solitary tracks on the path. At 25, he had the strong build of a peasant who knew hard labor, but his face held something refined. High cheekbones, an intelligent brow, and eyes the color of amber that seemed to catch light strangely. His curly brown hair, damp from melting snow, stuck to his forehead beneath a threadbare cap. He carried everything he owned in a hemp sack slung over his shoulder, a spare shirt, a wooden spoon carved by his late mother, and a small cloth bundle containing black bread and dried meat for the journey. His mother, Lena, had died 3 months prior, taking most of her secrets to the grave. But before the fever claimed her, she had whispered one truth that changed everything. His father had been a nobleman from Kov, someone powerful, someone she could never name. Seek work at the old castle, she had rasped, her eyes glassy with approaching death. There you might find answers. Now, standing before the massive oak doors reinforced with iron bands, Mikolaj felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He pulled the rope that rang a bell somewhere deep within, the sound echoing like a death nail. Minutes passed. Snow continued to fall. Then, with a groan that seemed to come from the earth itself, the door opened. An elderly man stood in the doorway, his face weathered like old leather, his hair completely white. He wore the dark livery of a castle steward, though the fabric was faded and patched. His name was Potter, and his eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much. "You must be the new cook," Potter said in a voice rough as gravel. "From Lloyd?" "Yes, Sir Mikolaj Kowalski. I received word you needed. Come in quickly, boy. Don't let the warmth escape." Patra pulled him inside and shut the door with surprising strength. The mistress doesn't like waste, especially not of firewood. The entrance hall took Mikolaj's breath away. Vaulted ceilings rose 3 stories high, supported by columns carved with scenes from old pagan myths. Slavic gods and demons intertwined in eternal struggle. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes and ancient battles hung from the walls. Their colors faded to ghosts of their former glory. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. The mistress rises at dusk, Patra explained as he led Mikolaj through cold corridors. You'll prepare meals for myself, the groundskeeper, Wojtek, and the two chambermaids, Agata and Zofia. We eat simple fare. The mistress has her own sustenance. Mikolaj nodded, though his mouth had gone dry. Everyone knew what vampires consumed, even if polite society pretended otherwise. The kitchen was surprisingly well-appointed. A massive stone hearth dominated one wall. Iron pots and copper kettles hung from ceiling hooks, and shelves held jars of preserved vegetables, dried herbs, and smoked meats. A rough wooden table occupied the center, scarred from decades of chopping and cutting. You'll sleep in the servants' quarters above the stable, Patra continued. Meals at dawn, noon, and dusk. Stay out of the east wing. That's the mistress's private domain. Don't wander at night. Don't ask questions about things you see or hear. And most importantly, the old steward gripped Mikol's shoulder with surprising force, his rheumy eyes suddenly sharp. Never ever disturb her during her grief. Her grief? Mikolaj asked despite himself. Pota's expression darkened. The king died 5 years ago. She loved him with an intensity that transcends death itself. His portrait hangs in the Great Hall, and sometimes we hear her speaking to it in the dead of night in languages older than Polish, older than Latin even. A chill ran down Mikolaj's spine that had nothing to do with the castle's temperature. Now then, Pota's voice returned to its businesslike tone. Prepare us some stew for the midday meal. There's mutton in the cold cellar, turnips, onions, and barley. Show me you can actually cook, boy, and you'll keep this position. As Pota left him alone in the kitchen, Mikolaj set to work. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. His mother had taught him well, but his mind wandered through the castle's shadows, wondering what secrets these ancient stones held, wondering if somewhere in this place he might find traces of the noblemen who had sired him. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering his tracks completely, as if the world itself was erasing his path back to the life he'd known. The castle had accepted him into its cold embrace, and somewhere in its depths, a vampire queen slept the sleep of the undead, unaware that fate had delivered the son of her lost love directly to her door. The game had begun, though neither player yet knew they were playing. 3 days passed in the castle like a dream wrapped in fog. Mikolaj settled into his duties with the quiet efficiency of a man grateful for work in a harsh winter. He woke before dawn when frost still clung to the windows like crystalline cobwebs, and prepared simple meals. Thick porridge with honey, dark bread, stews made from root vegetables, and whatever meat the groundskeeper Wojtek brought from the smokehouse. The other servants kept to themselves, speaking only when necessary. Agata and Zofia, the chambermaids, were sisters in their 40s who moved through the castle like ghosts, cleaning rooms that seemed to accumulate dust even as they wiped it away. Wojtek, a massive man with a scarred face and hands like tree roots, barely spoke at all. He communicated in grunts and nods, his eyes constantly watching the forest beyond the walls. Only old Pota showed any willingness to converse, though his words were carefully measured, as if he weighed each one for danger before releasing it into the air. You're adapting well, Pota observed on the third evening, watching Mikolaj clean the kitchen after the day's final meal. Most don't last a week. They hear sounds in the night, whispers, footsteps where no one should walk, and they flee before sunrise. I've heard nothing, Mikolaj lied. In truth, he had heard plenty. The soft rustle of fabric in empty corridors, the creak of floorboards in rooms above, and once a voice speaking in a language that made his skin prickle with instinctive fear. But he needed this position, needed the answers it might provide. Good, Pra said, though his expression suggested he didn't believe the lie. The mistress appreciates discretion above all virtues. That night, Mikolaj lay in his small room above the stables, listening to the horses shift restlessly in their stalls below. Sleep eluded him. His mother's dying words echoed in his mind. Your father was a great man, Mikolaj, greater than you can imagine. But his world was not ours, and his love for me was a secret that could have destroyed him. Who had he been? This mysterious nobleman from Krakow? And why had his mother's final wish been for Mikolaj to seek this particular castle? The next morning brought a change in routine. Potter approached him after breakfast with an unusual request. "The Great Hall requires attention," the steward said, his tone carefully neutral. "Dust has accumulated on the furnishings. The mistress will be displeased if she notices. I'm too old for climbing ladders to reach the high shelves. Can you manage it?" Mikolaj nodded eagerly. This was his chance to see more of the castle, to explore beyond the kitchen and servants' quarters. The Great Hall stood at the heart of the castle, accessed through a corridor lined with suits of armor that seemed to watch him pass. When Potter pushed open the heavy double doors, Mikolaj gasped despite himself. The room was magnificent and tragic. A vated ceiling rose 40 ft above, painted with fresco depicting celestial scenes, now faded and cracked. Enormous windows of leaded glass filtered pale winter light into columns of illumination that revealed thousands of dust motes dancing in the air. A fireplace large enough to roast an ox dominated the far wall, its mantle carved with the coat of arms of the Wysocka family. A white wolf beneath a crescent moon. Tapestries hung between the windows, their scenes depicting hunts and feasts from ages past. A massive oak table ran down the center of the hall, surrounded by high-back chairs that hadn't seated a soul in years. And along the walls, on shelves and mantels, stood various objects. Silver candelabras, now tarnished black golden chalices dulled with neglect. Leather-bound books whose titles had faded to illegibility. But what dominated the room, what drew the eye immediately, was the portrait. It hung above the fireplace, larger than life, protected by a frame of dark wood carved with intricate patterns of roses and thorns. The painting depicted a man in his prime, perhaps 35 years old, though with vampires and their companions, age was often deceiving. He wore the rich clothing of Polish nobility, a crimson doublet embroidered with gold thread, a fur-trimmed cloak, and around his neck, a heavy golden chain bearing a medallion Mitchell couldn't quite make out. But it was the face that arrested him. Strong features, a firm jaw, intelligent eyes that seemed to hold both warmth and sadness, hair dark and slightly curled, much like Mikolaj's own. A small scar on the left cheek, barely visible, and an expression of quiet dignity mixed with something else, perhaps longing, perhaps regret. "That is King Kazimír," Potter said softly, having followed Mikolaj's gaze. "Husband to Queen Elżbieta. He died 5 years ago this coming spring." Mikolaj couldn't speak. His throat had closed completely, because staring at that portrait was like looking into a mirror that showed not his present self, but what he might become in 10 years. The resemblance was impossible, undeniable, terrifying. "The cleaning supplies are in that chest," Potter continued, seeming not to notice Mikolaj's shock. "Start with the shelves along the north wall. Be careful with the old books. Many are irreplaceable. I'll return in 2 hours to check your progress." The steward left, his footsteps echoing away into silence. Mikolaj stood frozen, staring at the portrait, his heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. His hands trembled. His vision swam with tears he didn't understand. "Father," he whispered to the empty hall. The word hung in the air like smoke. No answer came, but the painted eyes seemed to look directly at him with an expression of infinite sadness. Moving as if in a trance, Mikolaj approached the portrait. He studied every detail. The shape of the nose, the set of the eyes, the curve of the mouth, all echoed in his own face. Even the slight curl of the hair matched his own unruly locks. His mother's words returned with crushing clarity. His world was not ours, of course not. She had been a peasant woman from Wavet. He had been, if this portrait spoke truth, the king of vampires, consort to an immortal queen. Mikolaj's legs gave way. He sank onto one of the dusty chairs, his head in his hands. How was this possible? Vampires could not father children, or could they? The old stories were unclear, full of contradictions and superstitions. Some said vampires were sterile, their bodies too dead to create life. Others whispered of dhampirs, half-human children born of vampire and mortal unions possessing strange abilities. Did that mean he was? A sound interrupted his spiraling thoughts. The soft whisper of fabric against stone. Mikolaj's head snapped up, his peasant instincts screaming danger. She stood in the doorway like an apparition materialized from mist. Queen Elżbieta Wysocka was both more and less than he'd imagined. Tall and slender, she moved with a grace that seemed to defy natural laws. Each step perfectly placed, each gesture economical and precise. Her gown was midnight blue velvet, cut in a style from decades past, high-necked and long-sleeved, embroidered with silver thread in patterns of stars and moons. But it was her face that held him captive. She was beautiful in the way ancient statues are beautiful, perfect, and cold and untouchable. Her skin held the pall of fine porcelain, unmarred by age or time. Those pale gray eyes, the color of storm clouds, fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel transparent. And her hair, that magnificent cascade of pure white that fell past her waist, caught the dim light like newly fallen snow under moonlight. "Who are you?" Her voice was low and melodious with an accent that spoke of old nobility, of a Poland that existed before the current kingdom. "And what are you doing in this hall?" Mikolaj tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't obey. He remained seated, staring up at her like a condemned man before his executioner. I'm Nikolaj, your majesty, the new cook. Patra sent me to clean." Patra should know better. She interrupted, gliding closer. "This room is not to be disturbed. It holds memories." Her gaze flickered to the portrait above the fireplace, and for just a moment her perfect mask cracked. Pain flashed across her features, raw, ancient, unbearable. Then it was gone, replaced by cold composure. She looked back at Mikolaj and her eyes narrowed. She took another step closer, studying his face with an intensity that made him want to flee. "You are staring," she said softly, dangerously. "Why?" The truth burst from him before he could stop it, fueled by shock and grief and a lifetime of questions. "Why is my father's portrait hanging in your hall?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. If you're enjoying the story, leave a like, a comment, and tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to reply. The silver tray Mitchell had been holding clattered to the floor, the sound exploding through the great hall like thunder. Crystal goblets shattered against stone, their fragments catching the pale winter light and scattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The noise echoed off the vaulted ceiling, bouncing between the ancient walls until it faded into a silence more terrible than any sound. Queen Elżbieta stood perfectly still, her face drained of what little color it possessed. For a creature who hadn't breathed in centuries, except by conscious choice, she now seemed to have forgotten how. Her pale gray eyes remained fixed on Mikolaj with an expression that shifted between shock, disbelief, and something darker, something that might have been recognition or perhaps terror. "What did you say?" Her voice emerged as barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of absolute command. Mikolaj remained on the chair, his legs still refusing to support him. His amber eyes, so like Kazimír's, blazed with a mixture of desperation and defiance. "That portrait," he pointed with a trembling hand toward the painting above the fireplace. "That man," my mother called him. She never spoke his name, but she described him. Before she died 3 months ago, fever took her, but not before she told me the truth. The truth. Elżbieta moved closer, her movements now less graceful, almost uncertain. She seemed torn between fleeing and advancing. And what truth would that be? That my father was a nobleman from Craiov, a man of great power who loved her in secret, who came to her for 3 summers when she worked in the merchant houses of the city. She was young, beautiful, and Mitch's voice cracked. He told her their love was impossible, that his world and hers could never truly meet. When she discovered she carried me, he gave her gold enough to return to her village and raise me in safety. She never saw him again. The queen circled him slowly like a predator assessing prey, but there was no hunger in her gaze, only a desperate need to understand. "Your mother's name Lena Kowalska from Łowicz originally, but she worked in Kov in the years 1463 to 1465. Elba stopped moving. Those dates, they aligned perfectly. Kazimír had been restless during those years before they had truly reconciled after one of their periodic separations. He had traveled frequently, claiming business in the city, returning to the castle smelling of summer air and human life. She had known he sought comfort among mortals. How could she blame him? She herself was a constant reminder of death, while humans offered warmth, brief though it was. But a child, Kazimír had never mentioned a child. "It's impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Vampires cannot father children. We are dead things animated by dark magic, by ancient pacts with forces beyond mortal comprehension. We cannot create life, yet here I stand." Mikolaj rose finally, his legs steadying. He was tall, nearly 6 ft with the broad shoulders of a working man. "You see the resemblance yourself." I can see it in your eyes, your majesty. You recognized something the moment you looked at me. Elżbieta turned away, facing the portrait of her lost husband. The painted eyes stared back at her with that familiar mixture of love and sorrow. How many nights had she stood here speaking to this image, begging it for answers, for comfort, for one more moment in his presence? Kazimír was not fully vampire, she said finally, her voice distant. He was turned late in life at 40 years of age after a wound in battle brought him to the edge of death. I offered him immortality to save him and he accepted. But the transformation never completed entirely. Something in his blood resisted. He retained certain human qualities, warmth though faint, a heartbeat though slow, and perhaps, she paused, the possibility settling over her like a shroud, perhaps the ability to sire children. She turned back to face Mikolaj. If what you say is true, if you truly are his son, then you are dhampir, born of vampire and mortal union. The old legends speak of such beings, though I have never encountered one. They possess certain gifts. Enhanced strength, resistance to vampire compulsion, the ability to sense supernatural creatures. Tell me, boy, have you experienced anything unusual in your life? Mikolaj thought back through his 25 years. The memories came rushing forward like water through a broken dam. I heal quickly. Wounds that should scar fade within days. I can see clearly in darkness where others stumble blind. And animals, they react strangely to me. Dogs either cower or become immediately loyal. Cats follow me through streets. Once I calmed a wild horse that 3 men couldn't break. Elżbieta's expression shifted again. The mask of cold nobility cracked further, revealing grief so profound it seemed capable of swallowing the world. Then it is true Kazimír left me a son and never told me. All these years I have mourned alone, believing I was the last remnant of our love. But he created something I never could. New life, a future, a legacy beyond endless night. She moved to the fireplace, placing one pale hand against the stone mantel as if needing support. You must understand, Mikolaj Kowalski, that I loved your father with an intensity that transcends human comprehension. When you have lived for centuries, you become numb to existence. Days blend into years, years into decades. Nothing surprises you. Nothing moves you. You are a statue of ice, beautiful and dead. Her voice grew softer, almost tender. Then I met Kazimír. He was a minor nobleman, a soldier who had fought in the wars against the Teutonic Knights. He stumbled into my forest, wounded and dying. I should have drained him and forgotten his name within a week. Instead, I fell in love. True love, the kind that poets write about and fools die for. He made me feel alive again, ironically, more alive than when I actually was alive centuries ago, when I was still human. She turned back to Mikolaj, and tears glistened in her eyes. Tears of blood, red as rubies, sliding down her porcelain cheeks. We had 42 years together before the sickness took him. Even vampire blood couldn't save him from whatever poison invaded his system. I held him as he died, whispering promises that we would meet again in whatever afterlife accepted creatures like us. And now you tell me he lives on in you in blood and bone. Mikolaj felt his own tears flowing freely. I never knew him, your majesty. My mother told me stories of a kind man with sad eyes, of gentle hands, and a voice that could calm storms. She said he taught her to read, gave her books of poetry, treated her not as a peasant, but as an equal. She loved him until her dying breath. The queen crossed the distance between them in 2 swift strides and took his face in her cold hands, studying every detail. Her touch was like ice, but not uncomfortable, more like the cool relief of stone on a hot summer day. She traced the line of his jaw, the shape of his nose, the curve of his brow. You have his eyes, she whispered, amber with flecks of green. I used to watch them change color with his moods, lighter when he laughed, darker when he brooded. And your hair, those curls he could never tame. No matter how much oil he applied, a saw caught in her throat. You even stand like him with that slight shift of weight to the left leg. He injured it in battle and never quite recovered. She released him and stepped back, composing herself with visible effort. The blood tears continued to fall, staining the collar of her midnight gown. This changes everything. You are not merely a servant in my household. You are the son of my beloved, the only child he ever sired. By rights of blood and lineage, you should be treated as nobility, perhaps even as heir to his titles. I seek no titles, your majesty, Mikolaj said firmly. I came here seeking only truth. My mother died without giving me that, and it has haunted me every day since. But now he looked again at the portrait. Now I know who I am. I am the son of Kazimír, and that is enough. Elżbieta nodded slowly. You have courage like he did, and honesty, which is rarer than courage. Very well, Mikad. If you desire truth, I shall give it to you. I will tell you everything about your father, his life, his loves, his fears and dreams. But know this, once you learn the full story, you can never return to the simple life you knew. The world of vampires is dangerous, filled with ancient feuds and dark magic. There are those who would kill you simply for existing, for being proof that our kind can create life. She moved to a side table and poured dark red liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 goblets. Wine or perhaps something else. She offered one to Mikolaj. Tonight, after the other servants sleep, come to my chambers in the East Wing. We will speak of Kazimír, of his world and yours, and we will decide what must be done. For now, clean up this mess and return to your duties. Pot must not suspect anything unusual. Not yet. Mikolaj accepted the goblet with trembling hands. The liquid was indeed wine, rich and spiced. Thank you, your majesty. Call me Elżbieta, she said softly. We are family now, bound by blood and grief. Formality serves no purpose between us. As she glided from the great hall, her white hair trailing behind her like a bridal veil, Mikolaj sank back onto the chair. He raised his goblet toward the portrait of his father. To truth, he whispered, and to the father I never knew. The painted eyes seemed to watch him with approval, and somewhere deep in the castle a clock chimed 3. The hour when day begins its slow surrender to night. The afternoon dragged like a wounded animal across the hours. Mikolaj cleaned the shattered crystal from the great hall's floor, his hands working mechanically while his mind spun in endless circles. Every time he glanced up at the portrait, his father's painted eyes seemed to hold new secrets, new questions that demanded answers. Potter returned as promised, his weathered face betraying nothing as he surveyed the cleaned hall. The mistress was here, he stated simply. It wasn't a question. The old steward had an uncanny ability to sense when the queen moved through her domain. Yes, Mikolaj admitted, seeing no point in lying. We spoke briefly, and you still live, still stand on steady legs, still possess all your blood. Potter's expression softened slightly. Then she saw something in you worth preserving. That is rare, boy. Very rare indeed. The elderly steward moved closer, lowering his voice, though they were alone. I have served this house for 43 years since I was younger than you are now. I watched King Kazimír arrive as a broken soldier and leave as a lord of darkness. I witnessed their love bloom like winter roses, beautiful, impossible, doomed to brief existence, and I held Her Majesty when she screamed at the heavens after his death. Her grief so profound it shook the very stones of this castle. He gripped Mikolaj's shoulder with surprising strength. Whatever secret you carry, whatever truth brought you here, guard it carefully. There are forces beyond these walls that would use any advantage against her. The vampire clans are not unified. There are those who see her as weak, isolated, ripe for conquest. A secret could become a weapon in the wrong hands. I understand, Mikolaj said, though his heart raced. How many secrets did this castle hold? How deep did the web of vampire politics extend? Good. Now prepare the evening meal. Wojtek brought fresh venison from the forest. The others will be hungry after their day's labors. The kitchen became a Mitchell's sanctuary as twilight approached. He worked with practice efficiency, preparing a hearty stew fragrant with herbs from the castle's winter garden, rosemary, thyme, and bay leaves that somehow survived the frost. The venison was tender, the vegetables perfectly seasoned. Cooking calmed him, gave his hands purpose, while his mind processed the impossible truth of his existence. Agata and Sophia ate in silence as always. Wojtek devoured his portion with animal efficiency, grunted his approval, and disappeared back to the stables. Poda watched Mikolaj throughout the meal with an expression that might have been concern or perhaps calculation. When the last dish was cleaned and the fire banked for the night, Potter spoke once more. The mistress has requested you attend her in the East Wing at the 10th hour. Do not be late. Do not bring weapons of any kind, not even a kitchen knife. And most importantly, do not fear her. She has invited you into her private sanctum, which means she has chosen to trust you. Honor that trust. Mikolaj nodded, his throat too tight for words. The 10th hour, 10:00 in the evening, when darkness held complete dominion over the winter landscape. He retreated to his small room above the stables, attempting to rest, but finding sleep impossible. His mind replayed the day's revelations in endless loops. He was dhampir, half vampire, half human, belonging fully to neither world. His father had been King Kazimír, consort to an immortal queen, a man who had loved deeply and died tragically. And his mother, simple Lena, had carried this immense secret to her grave, protecting her son from a truth that could destroy him. As the castle's great clock began its deep tolling of 10 chimes, Mitchell rose and made his way through corridors, now familiar yet still unsettling in their shadows and silence. The East Wing had been forbidden territory until now. The other servants never ventured there, and Potter had been explicit in his warnings during Mikolaj's first day. The entrance to the East Wing was marked by an archway carved with symbols that made his eyes ache if he looked too long. Protective wards, he realized with his newfound understanding, magical barriers against unwanted intrusion. As he crossed the threshold, he felt a tingling across his skin, like walking through a spider's web made of electricity. The wards recognized him, tasted his blood, and allowed him passage. The corridor beyond was different from the rest of the castle. Richer, more carefully maintained, lit by candles that burned with steady flames that never flickered despite the drafts. Tapestries depicting scenes of medieval life hung at intervals, noble hunts, courtly dances, romantic encounters beneath full moons. But something was off about them. Looking closer, Mitchell realized the figures in the tapestries had slightly elongated canine teeth, and their eyes reflected the candle light with an unnatural gleam. Vampire art, he thought with a shiver. Images of their world, their celebrations, their hunts. At the corridor's end stood a door of black oak reinforced with silver bands. Silver which folklore claimed could harm vampires. Perhaps these bands served as both protection and imprisonment, keeping others out while keeping something in. Before he could knock, the door opened silently. Elżbieta stood framed in the doorway, and Mikolaj's breath caught at the transformation. She had changed from her formal gown into something simpler yet more intimate. A long robe of dark green velvet that brought out hints of color in her pale gray eyes. Her white hair hung loose down her back, and for the first time she looked almost human. "Come," she said softly. "We have much to discuss, and the night is not as long as one might think." Her private chambers were a revelation. The outer room served as a library and study. Flordo's shelves packed with books in dozens of languages, some so old their leather bindings were cracked and faded. A massive desk stood near the window, covered with papers, maps, and what appeared to be alchemical equipment. Glass beers, copper tubes, and jars containing substances Mikolaj couldn't identify, but it was the personal touches that arrested his attention. A shelf held small objects clearly meant as mementos. A dried rose preserved under glass. A man's riding glove worn thin. A silver pocket watch stopped at 347. On the wall hung smaller portraits, sketches and paintings of Kazimír in various stages of life and unlife, from vigorous warrior to contemplative scholar. And in the corner, draped in shadows, stood a suit of armor polished to mirror brightness. Kazimír's armor, Mitchell knew instinctively, preserved like a shrine. "I have never brought anyone to these rooms since his death," Elżbieta said, closing the door behind them. "Not even Patra, who has served faithfully for decades. This is my sanctuary, my temple to memory. But you," she gestured for him to sit in one of the 2 high-back chairs positioned before a fireplace where flames danced with unnatural blue-green light. "You have a right to be here. This was your father's home as much as mine." She settled into the other chair with inhuman grace, and for a moment they simply sat in companionable silence, watching the strange flames. Finally, she spoke. "There are things you must understand about your father, about what he was and what he became. Kazimír was born in 1410, the year of the Great Battle of Grunwald, where Polish-Lithuanian forces crushed the Teutonic Knights. His father was a minor nobleman who fought in that battle and survived to tell the tales. Kazimír grew up on stories of glory and duty, of service to crown and country." She reached for a decanter on the side table, pouring 2 glasses of deep red wine. By 1450, he was a respected soldier and diplomat, married to a merchant's daughter with 2 young children. A normal life, a good life. Then came the plague. Mikolaj leaned forward, captivated. It swept through Krakow like fire through dry grass. His wife died first, then his children within days of each other. Kazimír fell ill himself, was given last rites and prepared for death. But fate, or perhaps dark providence, had other plans. In his fever delirium, he wandered from the city into Białys's forest, into my domain. Her eyes took on a distant quality, seeing events from over 3 decades past. I found him collapsed near the ancient oak that marks the heart of the forest, barely alive, more corpse than man. I should have left him to die. It would have been mercy. Instead, I did something I had not done in over a century. I offered the dark gift. I turned him into vampire, binding him to eternal night. Why? Mikolaj asked. Why save a stranger? Elba smiled sadly. Because even in his dying state, ravaged by a plague and fever, he looked at me without fear. He saw what I was. Creature of darkness, monster from children's nightmares, and he smiled. An angel, he whispered. Death has sent an angel. It was absurd, touching, and somehow it broke through centuries of isolation. I could not let him die. She sipped her wine, and Mikolaj noticed it left a faint red stain on her lips. Not wine, he realized with a start, but blood mixed with wine. Vampire sustenance diluted for easier consumption. The transformation should have been complete, she continued. Should have stripped away his humanity entirely, leaving only the hunger and the darkness. But something in Kazimír resisted. Perhaps it was the plague still in his system, or perhaps his will was simply too strong. He retained warmth, emotion, the ability to walk in sunlight, though it pained him. He was vampire, yes, but also still partially human, a bridge between worlds. And you fell in love, Mikolaj said softly. Desperately, completely, eternally, he became my consort, my king, my reason to continue existing through endless centuries. We ruled these lands together, maintaining the ancient treaties between vampire clans and human nobility. We hosted councils of the night, negotiated territorial disputes, even prevented wars. It was a golden age of sorts when darkness and light found balance. She set down her glass and fixed Mikolaj with her storm-gay eyes. But Kazimír never stopped being human at heart. He missed daylight, missed the taste of normal food, missed the simple pleasures of mortal existence. And he missed, she paused, choosing words carefully, he missed the possibility of creating life. Vampires can destroy, can corrupt, can transform, but we cannot create. Every vampire was once human, stolen from the world of the living. We can make no children, build no true legacy. So he sought out my mother, Mikolaj understood. Now, seeking humanity, seeking the life you couldn't give him. Yes, Elżbieta admitted, and her voice held no anger, only infinite sadness. I knew he traveled to Krakow, knew he sought company among humans. I did not know about Lena specifically, did not know about you. Had I known, she trailed off. What would you have done? Mikolaj asked carefully. She met his gaze steadily. I would have protected you both, ensured your mother had everything she needed, that you grew up safe and educated. You are Kazimír's son. That makes you precious beyond measure. I only regret that he never told me, never gave me the chance to know you as a child. A clock somewhere in the castle chimed 11. Outside the window, snow had begun falling again, fat flakes drifting past like wandering spirits. There is more you must know, Elżbieta said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. About the vampire world, about the dangers you now face simply by existing. Elżbieta rose from her chair with fluid grace and moved to a large cabinet carved from black walnut. Its surface was inlaid with silver symbols, protective runes from old Slavic tradition, mixed with stranger markings that seemed to writhe in the firelight. She opened it carefully, revealing shelves lined with ancient tomes, scrolls tied with faded ribbon, and objects that radiated an unsettling energy. The world of vampires, she began, withdrawing a leather-bound book whose cover bore no title, is governed by laws older than any human kingdom. When I speak of clans, I speak of families that have existed for millennia, each with their own territories, their own powers, their own jealously guarded secrets. She returned to her seat, the book resting heavy in her lap. The leather was worn smooth by centuries of handling, and the pages within were yellowed parchment covered in script that shifted between Latin, Old Polish, and languages Mikolaj didn't recognize. The Biały Las clan, my clan, was once among the most powerful in all of Eastern Europe. We ruled from the Baltic to the Carpathians. Our word was law among the creatures of night. But power attracts envy, and envy breeds treachery. Her fingers traced patterns on the book's cover, following grooves worn by countless repetitions of the same gesture. Over centuries, we were diminished through wars, betrayals, and simple attrition. Now I am the last, the sole remaining member of a bloodline that once numbered in the hundreds. Mikolaj felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. And the other clans, they would see you as vulnerable. Precisely. She opened the book, revealing pages filled with genealogical charts, family trees of the damned, showing how vampire lineages branched and twisted through time. The Zani Crew clan to the east, led by Lord Bronisaw, has long coveted these lands. The Sariani Sazit clan to the south, ruled by Lady Jadiga, seeks to absorb my territories through forced marriage or conquest. And there are others. The Kiwawi meets warriors who respect only strength. The Sienna Lashu mystics who trade in forbidden magic and darker pacts. Still, she turned pages showing Mikolaj illustrations that made his skin crawl. Vampires of various types and powers. Some looked almost human, distinguished only by their pale skin and sharp teeth. Others were monstrous with elongated limbs, bat-like features, or eyes that glowed with unholy light. The transformation into vampire takes many forms. Elbeta explained it depends on the bloodline, the method of turning, the strength of will of the transformed. Your father was fortunate, or perhaps cursed, to retain so much humanity. Many lose themselves entirely, becoming nothing but hunger with a face. She closed the book and set it aside. Now, as to why your existence matters so greatly, dhampirs are legend made flesh. Most vampires believe them to be myth, children's stories to frighten the newly turned. The old texts, she gestured to the book, speak of dhampirs as possessing extraordinary abilities, enhanced strength and speed beyond normal humans, but not quite matching pure vampires. Immunity to vampire compulsion and mind control, the ability to sense supernatural creatures from great distances, and most dangerously. She paused, her gray eyes boring into him, the ability to kill vampires more easily than any human hunter. Dhampir blood is poison to the undead. A single drop in a vampire's mouth can cause agony. Dhampir's bite can paralyze even ancient vampires. You are a natural predator of my kind. Mikolaj, a weapon that walks and breathes. Mikol's hand instinctively went to his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady. Too strong, perhaps too steady for a normal human. I've never harmed anyone, he protested. I'm a cook, not a warrior. Not yet, Elżbieta agreed, but the potential sleeps in your blood. And if the other clans learn of your existence, they will either try to kill you or capture you. Imagine a dhampir forced to serve as an assassin used to eliminate rival vampire lords. Imagine the wars that could be waged with such a weapon. She stood and moved to the window, staring out at the falling snow. There's more. Ancient prophecy speaks of a dhampir born of true love between vampire and human. One who would bridge the two worlds and either unite them or destroy them both. The prophecy of the Twilight Child recorded by the mystic vampires of Si Lashu 5 centuries ago. From a shelf, she withdrew a scroll so old it seemed ready to crumble at a touch. She unrolled it carefully, revealing text in archaic Polish mixed with Latin phrases. She read aloud, her voice taking on a ritual cadence. When death loves life and life embraces death, when summer's warmth meets winter's frozen breath, a child shall come with dual nature, blessed, half light, half shadow, neither cursed nor blessed. In his veins runs sunset's crimson hue, the power to end the old, begin the new. Beware the child of twilight's gentle hour, for in his choice lies either peace or power. Silence filled the room like water filling a tomb. Mikol felt the weight of those words settle on his shoulders like an iron mantle. You think I'm this twilight child? His voice sounded small, fragile. I don't know, Elżbieta admitted, returning to her chair. Perhaps your father was transformed but retained humanity. Death that loved life. Your mother was human who loved a vampire. Life that embraced death. You are born of genuine love, not merely lust or convenience. The pieces fit. She leaned forward, intensity burning in her eyes. But prophecies are treacherous things, Mikolaj. They can be interpreted 1,000 ways. What matters is what you choose to do with your nature, with the abilities you possess. Will you use them to bridge our worlds or to destroy one in favor of the other? Before Mikolaj could answer, a sound echoed through the castle. A howl that was neither wolf nor human, but something in between. It rose and fell in eerie cadence coming from somewhere beyond the castle walls deep in the forest of Balias. Elvira was on her feet, instantly her demeanor shifting from contemplative queen to predator on alert. Strion, she hissed the Polish word for a particular type of vampire spawn. The failed transformations that became mindless monsters. Someone has sent them. Someone knows you're here. She moved with supernatural speed to a cabinet and withdrew weapons, a sword of folded steel with a blade that gleamed silver in the firelight, and a dagger whose hilt was wrapped in leather blackened with age and use. She thrust the dagger toward Mikolaj. "Can you fight?" she demanded. "I've never. I'm just a cook. You're dhampir." She cut him off. "The instincts are in your blood. When the time comes, your body will know what to do. Now come, we must ensure the castle's defenses are secure." On, they rushed through the corridors, Elżbieta's white hair streaming behind her like a war banner. Mikolaj struggled to keep pace, his shorter legs working furiously while she seemed to glide over the floor. They descended spiral staircases 2 at a time, passed through galleries where ancient portraits watched their progress with painted eyes, and finally reached the great hall. Pot was already there, surprisingly armed with a crossbow loaded with bolts tipped in silver. Wojtek stood beside him holding a massive war axe that looked ancient enough to have seen the Battle of Grunwald itself. Even Agata and Zofia were present, each carrying blessed water in glass vials, their faces pale but determined. They circled the walls. Pot reported. At least a dozen SDR gone, maybe more. They test the barriers seeking weakness. Elżbieta moved to the window, her keen eyes penetrating the darkness beyond. They were sent, not wild. Wild Stygian don't hunt in packs with such coordination. Someone has commanded them, aimed them at this castle like arrows. Another howl split the night. Closer now. Then came a sound that chilled Mikolaj's blood. The scraping of claws on stone climbing the outer walls. The wards should hold. Elżbieta said, but doubt colored her voice. Unless they've been weakened somehow. A crash of shattering glass interrupted her. One of the high windows exploded inward, and through the opening came a nightmare-given form. The Strigon was humanoid, but twisted, limbs too long, joints bending at wrong angles, skin gray as corpse flesh, and stretched tight over prominent bones. Its face was a mockery of humanity, all sharp teeth and hollow eyes that glowed with sickly yellow light. It landed on the floor in a crouch, hissing like a snake, and its gaze fixed immediately on Mikolaj. It could sense what he was, smell the damper blood that called to it like a lodestone. "Protect him," Elba commanded, raising her sword. But the Strigon was fast, impossibly fast. It lunged across the hall in a blur of motion. Claws extended toward Mikolaj's throat. Time seemed to slow. Mikolaj saw death approaching. Saw the yellowed talons aimed at his jugular, and something inside him, something sleeping, something ancient, woke up. His body moved without conscious thought. The dagger Elżbieta had given him came up in a perfect arc, guided by instincts coded into his very DNA. The blade caught the Strayon in mid-leap, punching through its chest cavity with a sound like a butcher's cleaver hitting meat. The creature's howl changed pitch, becoming a shriek of agony. Where the blade touched its flesh, the skin bubbled and blackened as if burned by acid. The Strigon thrashed trying to pull away, but Mikolaj held firm. His strength, he realized with shock, was far greater than any normal human. Elżbieta's sword flashed, severing the creature's head in one clean stroke. The body collapsed, already beginning to decompose into something like gray ash mixed with black air. Silence returned, broken only by Mikolaj's ragged breathing and the sound of snow falling through the broken window. "Extraordinary," Poda whispered, staring at Mikolaj with new eyes. He moved like one of them. Elba knelt beside the dissolving Strayon, examining it with clinical detachment. She picked up a fragment of what might have been clothing, studied it, then stood with a grim expression. "This one wore the mark of Janny Crew clan," she announced. "Lord Bronislaw has made his move. He knows about you, Mikolaj. Somehow he's learned that Kazimír's son lives, and he sent his servants to eliminate you before you can become a threat." She turned to face him, her white hair now stained with drops of black blood, her eyes blazing with something that might have been pride or perhaps fear. "Your peaceful life is over," she said softly. "From this moment, you're a player in a game of shadows and blood that has been playing out for centuries. And whether you wish it or not, You must learn to survive in our world." Outside, more howls rose into the winter night. A dozen voices crying for blood, for death, for the dhampir who dared to exist. The siege had begun. The night became a crucible of blood and shadow. 6 more string breached the castle's defenses before dawn, each one drawn to Mikolaj like moths to flame. His dhampir blood sang to them, a beacon of power and promise, of prey that could elevate their miserable existence if only they could consume it. But Mikolaj was no easy prey. With each attack, his body responded with inhuman efficiency. The ancient instincts buried in his bloodline surfaced like air bubbles from drowning lungs. Desperate, necessary, life-saving. He moved with speed that blurred his form, struck with strength that shattered bone, and dodged with precision that seemed almost prescient. By the time pale winter dawn crept over the horizon, 7 SD Argon lay dead or dissolving in the castle's halls. Mikolaj stood in the great hall, covered in black air, and breathing hard but uninjured. Around him, the servants worked to repair damages and remove corpses, while Elżbieta watched from her position near the fireplace, her expression unreadable. "You're a natural warrior," she finally said as the last dry gun was dragged away by Wojtek. "Your father had to train for years to achieve such proficiency. You've done it in a single night." Mikolaj looked down at his hands. They were steady despite the violence, despite having taken lives, despite everything that should have left him traumatized. "I don't feel like myself," he admitted quietly. "When they came at me, something else took over. Something cold and efficient and hungry for the kill. Elsta finished. That's the vampire in you, the predator's instinct inherited through blood. But notice you didn't lose control. You didn't become a mindless beast. That's the human in you providing balance and restraint. This is what makes dhampir so dangerous. All the strengths of both species, few of the weaknesses." She gestured for him to follow her. "Come, you need to bathe and rest. But first, there's something you must see." They descended into the castle's lower levels, past the kitchens and storage rooms, down spiral stairs that seemed to burrow into the earth itself. The air grew colder, damper, and Mikolaj could smell old stone and something else, the mineral scent of deep water, the organic decay of ancient things. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a chamber that took Mikolaj's breath away. It was a vault, massive, circular, with walls carved directly from bedrock. Runes and symbols covered every surface, glowing faintly with blue-white light that provided the only illumination. In the center stood a stone altar, and surrounding it were pedestals holding various objects. "The treasury of Biały Las," Elżbieta explained, her voice echoing strangely in the space, accumulated over 15 centuries, preserved through wars and purges. "These are artifacts of power, items crafted by vampire mystics and human sorcerers during times when the two worlds worked together." She moved to the nearest pedestal, which held a circlet of silver worked with intricate knot work. The crown of whispers allows the wearer to hear thoughts of any creature within sight, useful for negotiations and detecting treachery. She moved to the next. The cloak of mists renders the wearer invisible in shadow, allows passage through locked doors as if they were air. Pedestal after pedestal revealed wonders and horrors, rings that could command lesser vampires, amulets that protected against magical attack, chalices that could purify poisoned blood, even a mirror that showed not reflections but possible futures. But Elżbieta led him past all these to the altar itself, where a single item rested on black velvet, a sword unlike any Mikolaj had ever seen. The blade was perhaps 30 in long, forged from metal that seemed to shift between silver and steel, depending on the angle of viewing. The crossuard was shaped like outstretched wings, and the pommel held a large amber stone that seemed to contain frozen fire. Suet Lba pronounced the name with reverence. The Dawnbreaker, forged in 967 AD by the last of the pagan smiths before Poland's conversion to Christianity. The blade was quenched in the blood of a willing sacrifice, a vampire who chose redemption over damnation. It is one of only 3 weapons in existence capable of permanently destroying even the oldest vampires. She lifted the sword with both hands, the effort seeming to cost her. Despite her supernatural strength, I have never been able to wield it. The blade burns vampire flesh like hot iron. Your father could hold it only because of his retained humanity, but even he found it painful. You, however, she extended the sword toward Mikolaj. He hesitated, then wrapped his fingers around the hilt. The moment skin touched metal, energy surged through him like lightning through a storm cloud. The amber stone in the pommel blazed to life, casting golden light that banished every shadow in the vault. The blade hummed with power, vibrating in his grip, but not painfully, more like greeting an old friend recognizing kindred. Impossible, Elżbieta breathed, taking a step back. The blade accepts you completely. Not even Kazimír could awaken it to such brightness. You truly are something unprecedented. The balance point between life and death, human and vampire, darkness and light. Mikolaj stared at the glowing weapon in his hands, feeling its power resonate with something deep in his chest. Why show me this? Why arm me with such a weapon? Because Lord Bronislaw will not stop with Strian. Elżbieta said grimly. Tonight's attack was merely a test, a probe to assess your capabilities. Now that he knows you can fight, he'll escalate. He'll send true vampires, perhaps even come himself. And when he does, you'll need every advantage to survive. She moved closer, her pale gray eyes intense. I'm going to train you, Mikolaj. Everything your father knew, everything I've learned in 8 centuries of existence, it's yours. The sword forms of the old Polish nobility, the shadow-walking techniques of vampire assassins, the mental disciplines that protect against compulsion and mind control. You'll learn to use your damper nature as weapon and shield both. How long do we have? Mikolaj asked, testing the sword's balance. It felt perfect in his hands, as if custom-made for his grip and reach. Days, perhaps a week if we're fortunate. Bronislaw is cautious. He'll want more information before committing to direct confrontation. That gives us time, but not much. She turned toward the stairs. Come, you need to rest for a few hours. At dusk, your real education begins. Mikolaj followed her back up through the castle. The sword Swiddle now belted at his side. It felt right there as if he'd been wearing it his entire life, and only now realized it had been missing. In his room above the stables, exhaustion finally claimed him. He collapsed onto the narrow bed, still wearing his blood-stained clothes, the sword lying beside him within easy reach. Sleep came quickly, but it brought dreams. Visions of his father Kazimír walking through moonlit forests, of battles fought with sword and fang, of a love that transcended death itself. And in one dream, he saw a figure standing at the edge of darkness, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the armor that now stood silent in Elżbieta's chambers. The figure turned, revealing Kazimír's face, and spoke in a voice like wind through winter trees. My son, the blood of 2 worlds flows in your veins. Choose wisely which world you will save, for you cannot save both. Mikolaj woke with a gasp as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across his room. Through the small window, he could see the forest of biolillas stretching endlessly, its darkness deepening as night claimed the land once more. A knock sounded at his door. It's time, came Elżbieta's voice. Your training begins now. He rose, strapped on the sword, and opened the door to find the vampire queen waiting in the corridor. But she was transformed. Gone were the elegant gowns and refined postures. She now wore practical clothing of dark leather, her white hair bound in a tight braid, and she carried training weapons in both hands. We start with the basics, she said, leading him toward the castle's inner courtyard. How to move silently, how to read an opponent's intentions, how to kill efficiently and without hesitation. You have natural talent, but talent without discipline is merely waste. The courtyard was enclosed by high walls open to the sky where stars were beginning to emerge like ice crystals on black velvet. Snow had been cleared from the center, revealing flagstones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Elżbieta tossed him a wooden practice sword. Attack me, she commanded. Don't hold back. Use everything you learned from last night's battle. Mikolaj hesitated only a moment, then moved. He was fast, faster than any human should be, but Elżbieta was faster still. She evaded his strike with minimal movement, her body flowing like water around stone. Her counter came almost too quickly to see. The practice blade stopped a hair's breadth from his throat. Too much power, not enough precision, she critiqued again. They trained for hours. Elżbieta pushing him relentlessly while offering guidance in a voice that never rose but never softened either. She taught him the old sword forms, the eagle's strike, the wolf's bite, the bear's embrace, techniques developed by Polish warriors centuries ago, and refined by vampire masters into something deadly and beautiful between bouts. She explained vampire society in greater detail. The clans operate under the Compact of Shadows, established in 847 AD after the last great vampire war nearly exposed our existence to human armies. We maintain territories, respect boundaries, settle disputes through formal duels rather than open warfare. But the Compact is fraying. Some elders believe humanity has grown too numerous, too technologically advanced. They advocate for culling, for reducing human populations through plague and war. And you, Mitchell, breathing hard from the latest bout. I believe in balance, Elżbieta replied. Humans and vampires have coexisted for millennia. We need them for blood, for labor, for the culture and art they create that gives even eternal life meaning. Wholesale slaughter would doom both species, but convincing others of this grows harder each year. She disarmed him with a swift twist of her wrist, sending his practice blade skittering across the stones. Lord Brawny's law represents the old way. Vampires as apex predators, humans as cattle. If he absorbs my territory, he'll implement harsh policies, increase tithes of blood, summary executions for minor infractions, breeding programs to ensure compliant populations. It would be a return to the Dark Ages in every sense. Mikolaj retrieved his weapon, his mind working. Then stopping him isn't just about protecting you or me. It's about protecting hundreds, maybe thousands of humans in these lands. Now you understand, Elżbieta said with satisfaction. This is bigger than personal survival. You've become a symbol, proof that vampire and human can create something new, something better than either species alone. That terrifies the old powers because it threatens their worldview. She sheathed her practice blade and extended a hand to help him up. Enough for tonight. Tomorrow we continue and I'll teach you shadow walking. How to move through darkness as if you were part of it. But now you need food and rest. As they walked back toward the castle, Mikolaj felt the weight of destiny settling more firmly on his shoulders. He was no longer just a cook seeking answers about his father. He was dhampir, bridge between worlds, potential savior or destroyer, the twilight child of ancient prophecy. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the castle walls, Lord Bronislaw was preparing his next move in a game that would determine the fate of both humans and vampires in these lands. The real war was just beginning. 5 days of intensive training transformed Mikolaj from uncertain cook into formidable warrior. Under Elżbieta's relentless tutelage, he mastered shadow walking, the vampire art of moving through darkness as if swimming through water, emerging wherever shadows pulled. He learned to sense supernatural creatures from hundreds of yards away, their presence registering as cold pressure against his consciousness. Most importantly, he discovered how to control the damper hunger that lurked beneath his human facade, the predatory instinct that whispered seductive promises of power and dominance. On the 6th night, Lord Bronislaw arrived. He came not with an army, but with a delegation. 10 vampires of ancient lineage, each radiating power that made the air thick and difficult to breathe. They approached the castle under flag of parley observed by Mikolaj from the battlements, as Elżbieta stood beside him, white hair whipping in the cold wind. He's beautiful. Mikolaj observed, studying the lord who led the procession. Bronislaw was tall and broad-shouldered with hair black, as raven wings and eyes that glowed amber even at this distance. He wore armor of dark metal chased with gold, and carried himself with the absolute confidence of someone who had ruled for centuries. It's dangerous, Elsie corrected. 400 years old, turned during the reign of Kazimír for Jaguin. He survived 3 major clan wars, eliminated 7 rival lords, and expanded his territory through conquest and marriage. He seized these lands as the final piece needed to establish dominance over all of southern Poland. They descended to the great hall where Potter had prepared for formal reception. Candles blazed in every sconce. The fire roared in the hearth, and 2 high-backed chairs stood positioned before it like thrones. Elżbieta took her seat with regal bearing, while Mikolaj stood at her right hand. The sword Sweat Laura's belted at his side. Its amber pommel gleamed in the firelight, drawing every vampire eye as they entered. Lord Bronislaw strode forward, his entourage fanning out behind him in practiced formation. Up close, his beauty was almost painful, features sculpted to perfection, skin pale as moonlight, lips curved in a smile that promised both pleasure and death. "Queen Elżbieta," he said, his voice deep and cultured. "It has been too long since we met face to face." 20 years, 3042, Elżbieta replied coolly. "At the Council of Wawel, before my beloved Kazimír's death, you expressed condolences then, though I recall they rang hollow." Bronislaw's smile didn't waver. "I respected Kazimír truly. A warrior of considerable skill, a diplomat of rare wisdom. His loss diminished us all." His amber eyes shifted to Mikolaj, studying him with predatory intensity. "But it seems reports of his complete demise were premature." "This is Mikolaj Kowalski," Elżbieta introduced, her voice carrying warning. "Son of King Kazimír, born of human mother, dhampir by blood and right. He stands under my protection as heir to Biały Las. Murmurs rippled through Bronislaw's entourage, surprise, disbelief, calculation. The Lord himself showed no reaction beyond a slight narrowing of his eyes. "Fascinating," he said softly. "Dhampir, I had sought them legend, stories to frighten young vampires. Yet here stands living proof that our kind can indeed create rather than merely corrupt." He took a step closer, and Mikolaj felt the weight of his presence like physical pressure. "Tell me, young dhampir, do you know what you represent?" "I represent possibility," Mikolaj answered, keeping his voice steady. "The chance for balance between human and vampire, for coexistence rather than domination." "Pretty words," Bronies acknowledged. "But naive. There can be no balance between predator and prey, no coexistence between shepherd and sheep. The natural order demands hierarchy, and we vampires stand at its apex. Your existence doesn't change this. It merely adds a new variable to an old equation." He turned back to Elżbieta. "Which brings me to why I'm here. You're isolated, your majesty, alone. The last of your bloodline defending lands you can no longer adequately protect. Strian breach your walls. Your servants grow old and die unreplaced. And your influence in vampire councils has waned to nothing. I offer you an honorable exit. Merge Balilas with Garneycrook. Become my consort. Unite our territories, and together we'll establish an empire that will endure for millennia." "And if I refuse?" Elżbieta asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. "Then I claim these lands by right of conquest. My forces number in the hundreds. Vampires, thralls, bound creatures of darkness accumulated over 4 centuries. You have yourself a handful of aging servants and one untrained dhampir." He gestured dismissively at Mikolaj. "The outcome is inevitable. I'm offering you the chance to surrender with dignity intact." Silence filled the great hall. Mikolaj felt his hand drift toward Switlow hilt, felt the sword respond to his touch with a pulse of warmth. The weapon wanted to be drawn, wanted to taste vampire blood and fulfill its purpose. But Elżbieta raised a hand, stilling him. "I have a counter-proposal, Lord Bronislaw, one that honors ancient tradition and the compact of shadows." Interest flickered in the Lord's amber eyes. "I'm listening. Trial by combat. Single warrior from each side fighting to surrender or death. If your champion wins, I'll abdicate peacefully and merge my lands into yours. If mine wins, you withdraw your claim and leave bees in peace for 100 years. Bronislaw's smile widened, showing the tips of elongated canines. "Bold, but your champion would be the dhampir." "Yes, untested, barely trained, facing one of my veteran warriors." He seemed to consider, then nodded. "Very well, I accept, because I'm curious to see what dhampir can truly do. We'll hold the trial tomorrow at midnight in the forest clearing where the old oak stands, neutral ground witnessed by both parties." He turned to leave, his entourage falling into formation around him, but paused at the doorway. "One more thing, your majesty. Win or lose, the dhampir's existence cannot remain secret. Word will spread through every vampire clan from here to Constantinople. He'll be hunted, courted, feared, and desired. His peaceful life ended the moment you revealed him tonight. I hope for his sake that was a price worth paying." They departed, leaving cold silence in their wake. Potter immediately began securing doors and windows while Wojtek checked weapons. But Elżbieta remained motionless in her chair, staring into the fire with an expression of profound regret. "You shouldn't have offered me as champion," Mitchell said quietly. "I'm not ready to face a vampire warrior with centuries of experience." "You're more ready than you know," Elżbieta replied. "And you have advantages. Dhampir blood that can poison with a bite, speed, and strength enhanced beyond vampire norm. and sweat loses, which can kill permanently where normal weapons cannot. She finally looked at him, her gray eyes swimming with unshed tears. But you're right that this is unfair. I've placed an impossible burden on you, used you as a pawn in political games you never asked to play. I'm sorry, Mikolaj. I'm so terribly sorry. He knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hand in his warm one. You've given me truth about my father, purpose beyond survival and family I never knew I needed. If I must fight to protect that, then I'll fight. Not because you commanded it, but because it's right. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations. Elżbieta taught him vampire weak points, where to strike for maximum damage, how to exploit the momentary paralysis that followed damper blood contact, when to press advantage, and when to retreat. Pot blessed Sud Lucrece with prayers from both Christian and pagan traditions, hedging supernatural bets. Even Agata and Zofia contributed, sewing protective symbols into a new shirt of dark linen that would allow freedom of movement. As midnight approached, they gathered in the courtyard, Elżbieta, Mikolaj, and the loyal servants who had become his unlikely family. Snow fell gently, coating everything in pristine white that glowed under the full moon's light. Whatever happens tonight, Elżbieta said, addressing them all, know that you've served with honor beyond measure. If I fall, if we all fall, the memory of Balila's clan will endure in history as one that chose principle over expediency, balance over domination. They walked together into the forest, following paths that predated human settlement. The ancient oak stood in a clearing at the forest's heart, a massive tree that had witnessed centuries of vampire councils, duels, and treaties. Its bare branches reached toward the stars like supplicating hands. Lord Bronislaw waited with his entourage, their eyes glowing in the darkness like predatory animals. Beside him stood his champion, a female vampire of terrifying aspect. She was tall and lean with hair the color of dried blood and eyes like chips of ice. Her name, Bronislaw announced, was Katarzyna, and she had been turned during the Swedish deluge of the 1650s. She carried twin sabers of black and steel and moved with the fluid grace of a master swordswoman. The rules are simple, Broni's law declared, his voice carrying through the clearing. Combat continues until one fighter surrenders or dies. No interference from seconds. No magic beyond the combatant's natural abilities. The compact of shadows binds all present to honor the outcome. Mikal stepped into the clearing center, drawing Switlow. The blade blazed to life, its amber stone casting golden light that pushed back the darkness. Across from him, Katarzyna smiled coldly and drew her sabers with a sound like singing steel. For Byalas, Mikolaj whispered. For the old ways, Katarzyna responded. They clashed. The vampire was fast, faster than the strayon, faster than anything Mikolaj had yet faced. Her sabers wove patterns of death in the air, each strike precisely calculated to test his defenses. But Mikolaj's training held. He parried, dodged, and counter-attacked with techniques learned from Elżbieta and instincts born from dhampir blood. Suet sang its own song, the blade cutting through air with supernatural keenness where it passed close to Katarzyna. She hissed and recoiled. The weapon's holy properties painful even without contact. They fought across the clearing, their movements too fast for human eyes to follow clearly. Snow exploded where their feet struck. Branches snapped from the force of near misses, and the air itself seemed to scream with the violence of their exchange. Katarzyna drew first blood, one saber slicing across Mikolaj's shoulder, drawing a line of crimson. But instead of weakening him, the wound seemed to ignite something primal. His dhampir nature surged fully awake and his speed doubled. He pressed the attack with renewed ferocity, sweet lore becoming a blur of golden light. His blade connected a shallow cut across Katarzyna's arm. Her scream shattered the night. Where dhampir blood touched vampire flesh, it burned like acid. Her arm went limp, the saber falling from nerveless fingers. Mikolaj didn't hesitate. Elżbieta's training had been clear. In combat, mercy was weakness. He struck again. Sweet Loris piercing Katarzyna's chest, the blade's holy properties igniting her undead flesh from within. She collapsed, her body already beginning the rapid decomposition that claimed permanently slain vampires. Silence. Then slowly, Bronislaw began to applaud. Remarkable, truly remarkable. The dhampir lives up to legend. He met Elby's gaze across the clearing. The terms are honored. Biały Las remains independent for 100 years. I withdraw all claims. He approached Mikolaj, who stood breathing hard, Sud lore still glowing in his grip. But heed my earlier warning, young one. Every vampire clan from the Baltic to the Black Sea will now know your name. Some will seek alliance. Others will seek your death, and still others will try to breed you like prized livestock to create more dhampers. Your trials have only begun. The Lord and his entourage departed, melting into forest shadows. Mikolaj stood alone in the clearing for a moment, processing what he'd done, what he'd become. Then Elżbieta was beside him, her arms wrapped around him in an embrace that held centuries of loneliness finally relieved. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us all." They returned to the castle as dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with shades of gold and crimson, twilight colors, perfect for the child born between worlds. In the great hall, Poda had prepared a feast, simple food that reminded Mikolaj of his mother's cooking, of the human life he'd left behind. "What happens now?" he asked Elżbieta as they sat before the fire, the sword, sweet Loris, resting across his knees. "Now," she smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "Now we rebuild, train more defenders, strengthen alliances with vampire clans who value balance, protect the humans in our territory. And you," she took his hand in hers, "you become what your father always dreamed of, a bridge between darkness and light, teaching both sides that coexistence isn't just possible, it's necessary." "The Twilight Child," Mikolaj murmured, remembering the prophecy. "Not a destroyer," Elżbieta said firmly. "A uniter. That's the choice you've made, and I believe it's the right one." As the sun rose fully, Elżbieta retired to her chambers. But before leaving, she embraced Mikolaj once more. "Thank you for giving me hope again, for proving that Kazimír's legacy lives on in more than memory." Mikolaj stood at the great hall's window, watching dawnlight transform the forest of dahlias from threatening darkness into natural beauty. Somewhere in those trees, his father had once walked. Somewhere in this castle, love had transcended death itself. And now a new chapter began. Not the end of the story, but a beginning of alliance between species, of balance between predator and prey, of a dhampir who chose to build bridges rather than walls. The portrait of King Kazimír gazed down from above the fireplace, and Mikolaj could have sworn the painted eyes held pride and approval. "I understand now, father," he whispered. "The blood of two worlds flows in my veins, and I choose to honor both." Outside, the world continued turning. Humans in their villages, vampires in their domains, and one dhampir standing between them, guardian of the twilight where both could meet in peace. The story of Mikolaj Kowalski, son of Kazimír, heir to Biały, and the Twilight Child of Prophecy had truly just begun. If you like the story, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me what impressed you most about it. Turn on notifications to always receive updates on future videos.